Back in the late 2000s, M2 reinvigorated 3 classic Konami series exclusively for Nintendo's WiiWare digital service under the ReBirth moniker. The first dropped in September of 2008 in Japan and focused on the Gradius series. In March of the following year, it was made available in North America. The Contra franchise would receive the same treatment in September of 2009 over here. I really regret not purchasing these 2 games when the online store was still up and running, but that's just the way it goes with digital exclusives. I've spat my vitriolic opinions regarding Nintendo's antiquated business practices across a ton of the videos on this channel, so I'll save the rant this time. Besides, it's up to Konami to preserve their legacy, and who knows if that'll ever happen. Insert tired, lazily formed pachinko joke here. Out of these new takes on classic Konami properties, I purchased The Adventure ReBirth, which was made available over here at the tail end of 2009. At the time, I was pretty underwhelmed by it, if I'm being honest. Every October, I make my way through the majority of the Castlevania games, but generally tend to skip this one entirely. What a great way to start a review, am I right? Hey folks, I've never really been into this thing, so how about I yammer on about it? Alright, so anyway, pushing forward. This year I dusted off the Wii, purchased a new pair of the old AA's because we all know how that fucking controller juices the goddamn things even when it's not in use, and played me some ReBirth, Castlevania style. My opinions on this thing have changed somewhat over the past decade or so. I'm still not quite sure why they felt the need to name this thing after the first Game Boy entry. In the same vein as the other ReBirth titles, this is more of a celebration of the Castlevania legacy than a reworked version of that first handheld game. The others were just called Contra and Gradius, with the ReBirth moniker. It's a bit confusing, but I'm not going to belabor the point. Visually, it reminds me a lot of Bloodlines on the Genesis, or the inferiorly titled The New Generation in Europe and Australia on the Mega Drive. Too much blood for those folks, perhaps. Similarly to that gorgeous-looking 16-bit Sega entry, The Adventure ReBirth has a bright, colorful art style that really pops off the screen. It also contains some pretty goofy Bloodlines-like character designs that don't necessarily always work for me. Overall, this game is aesthetically pleasing, but some enemies and bosses look like they were sculpted from silly putty, which gives them a very squishy, bulbous, cartoony appearance. At times, this thing has a real 80s Saturday morning kid show vibe. The Filmation He-Man sound effects don't really help matters much either.
What in eternity is going on? Better take cover, Your Highness.
Come on, Cringer. We're needed.
Some of the bosses are pretty cool. I really like the duel with Death, and this Bat Lady is particularly engaging to come up against, but for every interesting encounter, there's a silly one, such as a gigantic eyeball or Peter Play-Doh here. When it comes to the design, it's a mixed bag, but I'd say the majority of the big bads are at least entertaining to come up against. They have interesting patterns to learn for the most part, and there are a large amount of mid-bosses throughout the journey, which are sometimes more engaging to face than the end-stage ones. The ever-recurring bat gives me some serious Super NES Dracula X vibes, and I've got to say, I really enjoyed the 3 incarnations of Dracula in this game. There's a Symphony of the Night homage that plays out when Belmont enters that I appreciated, and the fight or fights are very well done, with some of the best creature designs in the entire adventure. There are heaps of regular enemies strewn throughout the levels, and you'll be facing a wide variety of them until the very end of the game. The majority are stripped straight from the classic Castlevania series, but there are a few nods to Symphony of the Night tossed in as well, for all of you egomaniacs out there. A lot of the creatures and traps from the 8-bit Game Boy titles show up, including a buttload of eyeballs, orb spewers, and spikes. No ropes though. They are teased a bit with the return of these bone-tossing skeleton climbers, but their hanging lines can't be interacted with. Instead, we're back to stairs, which is admittedly fine, but why not include both? This is called The Adventure Rebirth, and ropes were kind of a big deal in that game as well as its two successors. Yeah, I'm looking too much into the title of this package again, but I'm just saying, throw me a bone and let me climb a bit if you're gonna name it after that thing. The Fire Whip returns from the Game Boy series, but now it functions on a timer so enemies can't strip your Belmont of his projectile power. It's fine, I mean, it's not really a big deal because there are power-ups all over the place, so it's as good a change as any. All of the sub-weapons return from the original 8-bit NES game and Dracula's Curse, so the whip upgrades are just another perk in an ocean of many options. The pickups all work the same as ever, with hearts acting as your ammo, though similarly to Belmont's Revenge, I did find myself hungering for more sub-weapon juice in many situations, but that could just be a me problem. Maybe I'm a bit too liberal with my axe tossing shenanigans, who knows. Either way, it's nice to have the full arsenal return. It allows for a freer playstyle, and that's always a good option to have. Speaking of options, there are quite a few to mess around with from the title screen. The Adventure Rebirth is stuffed with a variety of customizations and perks. Gameplay-wise, your Belmont is much more maneuverable both on the ground as well as in the air, but purists can swap this out for a more traditional style. The music and sound effects can be adjusted as well as the overall difficulty. I didn't realize when I was capturing footage that I was starting out the game with 9 lives, so I'm assuming this is the default, which seems rather generous. What I really like are all of the controller options. If you want to play this thing like an animal, you can stick with the standard configuration, which makes use of the Wiimote and Nunchuck. But if you're a normal, law-abiding citizen who lives on planet Earth, it is possible to only use the controller. If you prefer space-age alien technology, you can opt to use the GameCube alternative, but I always stick with the Wiimote, because holding it makes me feel like a giant. Aliens, giants, whatever. The point is, your controller options are covered, so pick your poison and live out your fantasies right now in Castlevania: The Adventure Rebirth. Options, choices. This game has a ton of hidden areas and branching paths that are accessible with keys. These things take up an item slot, so it's important to be mindful of what you decide to grab as you make your way through the stages. Needless to say, this adds a lot to the experience. The Adventure Rebirth is practically begging for the player to replay it, with all of the secrets and areas it contains. There are checkpoint markers to indicate respawn points, but these are also really good indicators of hidden paths. I'm a big fan of this key system. It pays homage to Vampire Killer on the MXS and the fewer areas that it was used in Rondo of Blood. I, for one, love secrets, and you do too. Every day I have to find my keys, and it's always an adventure. Castlevania Rebirth is an adventure. It says so right in the title.
I lost my keys, but then I looked and found my...
There are 6 stages to explore, but it's more like 5, as the Dracula encounter mostly makes up the final one. This might sound like a paltry amount of areas on paper, but the environments are long and dense, like my manhood, with a lot of variety and explorable sections. They feel like 2 or 3 normal stages crammed into one, with a lot of intricately designed set pieces. The castle can feel labyrinthian at times, with multiple routes to meander through in order to reach an exit. There's one particular puzzle sequence that pays homage to the first Game Boy title that I enjoyed, despite not being a fan of mazes. It's pretty short and easy to suss out, but it was certainly a welcomed addition in my eyes. Every level is positively crammed with things to do and traps to avoid, so the game is never boring and the entire journey is excellently paced. Speaking of traps, I've gotta commend the developers for including so many interesting hazards along the way, and the fact that they can be manipulated in order to take out enemies is refreshing. I'm a huge fan of games that do this. It's just so satisfying and encourages some strategic thinking to an otherwise by the numbers genre, where hacking, jumping, and slashing are the player's most reliable means of success. This thing is just packed with variety, and it's very tightly designed from top to bottom. Where else can MSX fans relive those maze-like staircase sequences from Vampire Killer, all in glorious 480p? Now you're playing with power.
Now you're playing with power. Superpower.
Manabu Namiki composed the soundtrack here, which is made up of remixes of other Castlevania tracks. It was officially packaged in a compilation album with Contra ReBirth's music, and contains a lot of lesser-known themes, including the high-score table piece from the arcade game, as well as a track from the X68000 remake of Castlevania. Oddly enough, there are no compositions from the adventure, but there is a number taken from its sequel, Belmont's Revenge. I'm a huge fan of Michiru Yamane's work in the series, so it always thrills me to hear her compositions reimagined. This version of Yamane's reincarnated soul is the perfect way to kick things off. Vampire Killer is teased as the stage is introduced, which is a nice touch, and Bloodlines is one of my favorite games in the franchise, so this always tickle-tongues a ton of special areas in my ears. Overall, the music has that classic Konami sound, complete with those exaggerated treble accents heard in the majority of their home console conversions of arcade games from the early 90s. You know the ones. It's clear that M2 were knowledgeable and had reverence for the Castlevania franchise. There are tons of nods to the entire series in the adventure ReBirth. It has a bit of that budget title vibe, but they definitely produced a quality product, with the resources they had available. It's still not among my personal favorite games in the world of Castlevania, but I've certainly learned to appreciate it a lot more over the years. Ultimately, it's a tidy little homage to the franchise as a whole, and I respect it for what it brings to the table. Plus, it might be the last traditional game we get in the entire series. Konami certainly doesn't seem too interested in giving its fans anything new. This is where you can toss in your own lame pachinko joke for a second time. Castlevania The Adventure ReBirth is a great time that I wholeheartedly recommend. All of you people who slept on this thing back in the days of the Wii should get off your ass, finish that time machine you know you're all collectively working on, and go back to 2009 to download it. Of course, there are more nefarious ways of getting a hold of it these days, but I'm a good person who would never suggest something so filthily wretched. Next time on this channel, we'll be taking a look at a fan-made ROM hack of the first NES Castlevania game. So stay tuned. Oh, so that's how you use it, huh? I was flinging it around, damaging everything in my house. That cat's left paw is never going to grow back, and that Ming-era vase was my retirement plan. I guess I should have paid more attention to this static caution screen a bit more. Okay, Nintendo. I get it. Yeah. Alright. Okay. It's going on a little bit long now. Okay, I get it, Nintendo. Wrap the thing around the hand, yeah. Okay. No more accidents. No more accidents. Wow. Beautiful.